What? Great, thank you. Do I have to hit OK? Yes, I have to hit OK. What is Judaism? Judaism is the religion or the way of life or the culture, if you want to use all the different words we learned, the halacha, the law, take out Mr. Bluetooth. It is the fixed traditions, but then, of course, it's changed over time. But it is an invention of the people we call rabbis. Oh, good. Devon's. Stephanie, if you will hit the admit people, and Devon is both of them usually. Okay, so I was just saying, don't worry about it. You didn't miss that much, Devon and Jamie. I said that Judaism, as we know it, and I think that probably we have 7 people, and I'm sure that Sam and Emily will be coming. So there's Sam. Okay, good. Okay, so everybody's pretty much here. Oh, I see you hit this. You hit the admit. Hi, Sam and Emily. Okay, I'll say it again. What we know of as Judaism is, I don't want to say invention because that sounds like something made up out of the blue, but it is a creation of an adaptive tool, an adaptive way of life that the rabbis created after the destruction of the temple, second temple, and then especially after the Romans destroyed everything in the all of Israel, kicked them out, sent them on their way, changed the name of the place, Syria, Palestina. I mean, not only was the temple in ruins, but the whole country was pretty much abandoned. There were some people who probably stayed in the Galilee, but most of the core rabbis, as we know them, moved, believe it or not, back to Babylonia. This is the new Babylonia, not the Babylonia of Nebuchadnezzar. There was always a Jewish community that stayed there. And when they came back, and this is a side issue, but I'll make a little joke. We Jews have always been bipolar. What do I mean? We've always felt like we needed to have the place we live and the place we got to escape to if we can't live there. So Russia and America, Israel and America, America and, God forbid, I don't know, Canada. So there's always been, it goes all the way back to that time that let's review some of the history to go to this. I know you guys have hopefully had these already, but let's just look at this timeline. Share screen. And maybe I might show one of the videos. A show of hands, while I'm doing this, it's very soon. Who has, just say, you're not muted. Who has been able to see either video number 1 or video number 2 of the Jews of People's History? Just say your name.
Taylor.
You did. Okay, cool. Oh, then you know something of what I'm talking about. Joe, I consider you a sage among us. You're a auditing, but did you have a chance to look at this stuff?
Oh, sorry. Thought you were still talking to me.
No, Joe. Well, anybody, just go through. Just say yes, no, whoever.
Yes, no.
Okay, yes or no. Yes. No, you didn't.
What I am still puzzled about, after 256 and the Maccabean revolt and all that, and you have the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Is that how you pronounce it?
Oh, yeah, but you're getting into the topic. But go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. I'm so thoroughly confused by all this mishmash that went on after the Second Temple was destroyed.
Right. After the Second Temple was destroyed. Yeah. Right. Okay.
So clarify this whole thing for me.
Okay. And that's why, guys, I recommended, any way you want to do it. If you want to watch videos, Christina mentioned last time that she has seen, or maybe she's looked at parts of the Abba Ibn heritage, the civilization of the Jews. That's great. I used to show that, and I still would. We have it at the synagogue. Oh, Stephanie's back. Okay. What happened? Maybe she got booted out. The other one that also Christina mentioned is Simon Schama, The Story of the Jews. This one, I started using this particular set because it has actors. A lot of these videos have talking heads. This is Abba Ibn. He's gone now, but I was one time an ambassador, and here I am standing in the ruins of the temple, or the ruins of Masada. And it's great. It's interesting, but you got to be willing to listen to that. Simon Schama, same thing, but maybe a little bit better because he's got access to a lot more archaeology. The good advantage about the one I mentioned, the Jews of People's History, it's made in Europe. Let me stop the screen share for just a second. But I'm going to get to the dates for a minute. The film is made in Europe under their supervision. So it's got German and Israeli rabbis living in Germany and France, and English, and not as many Americans. And that's kind of interesting because they have a whole scene going on there too. So for example, I'm not going to get into the film now, but maybe later. For example, they talk about the Exodus from Egypt, and then they show you contemporary. This is what Jews do at the Passover Seder. They eat the bread, the matzah. So it's kind of cool because it goes through that. Yes, I know Christina has a lot of books. All of you, I'm saying it again, Christina, you're so quick on the texting, but she doesn't like to talk that much. It's great. If any books you have, there's no book, except for something dumb or messianic or something, but you'll always be able to find a good book on Jewish education. The one I recommended for the history is, because it's fun and light, is this guy, Stan Mack. So anyway, here we go. I'm not as good as Stan Mack in terms of like showing you a comic book, but here are the dates again, and hopefully this will help Joe's question too. But we're going to cover it all. Okay, so we're talking about I kind of want to cover some of the Maccabee period, and what we're going to attempt to do in the next 3 weeks up to Hanukkah is cover. This is going to be a huge proposition, but to cover the Greco-Roman period and the Hellenistic period. But there's this brief blip in the middle with Alexander the Great. Okay, so we're in Israel and Judea, as it was known then. And you remember before this, 722, remember the dates go backwards, 722 BCE, the Assyrians attack and take over northern Israel. And that's where we get the so-called 10 lost tribes. So that whole area is not wiped out, but again, what you would do in those days to conquer an area and to take control is you took the people prisoner. So, and usually not the wealthy, but the merchants, the royalty. So the last kings of Israel are gone. And so that's the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom is attacked, and Assyria and Babylonia get confused because they're close to each other. But Babylonia is today where Iraq is. Again, they're not, they're evil people, but they're not doing it because they hate us, although God made it feel that way. the book of Lamentations made it feel that way. It was all God's will. But everybody wanted a piece of the Holy Land because it's right there. It's got access to the sea, and it's on the way to Egypt. So as I told you before, Egypt down south, Babylonia up east, northeast. Okay, so when this happens, It's in the film. It's kind of cool. Not cool, but they don't take all the people. They take the upper class, the merchants, the intelligentsia, and they cart them off in chains, literally, to Babylonia through the desert. And that's how it's pictured. The last king, this has to do a lot with the Christianity thing. There is no king left that is of the background of King David. The last king was taken prisoner. But ironically, and some of the people stayed, the poor people stayed, and Jeremiah, we talk about him sometimes, went to Egypt. So some went down, again, you have to escape. Some went to Egypt. The poor people stayed there, the rabble, I don't want to say the rabble, but so when Ezra and Nehemiah return 70 years later, they find people living there that are, highly assimilated. They become very intermarried with the pagans and all that business. But let's go back. 586, the temple is destroyed. That's a year that you got to remember. It's an important year. Approximately 538, Cyrus conquers Babylonia. That's where at the Passover Seder, there's this funny little song, my father had two zuzim, that's the two tablets of the law, and then what is it? The cat came and ate the goats, ate the two kids, the goats, and the dog came and bit the cat, and the fire came, the stick came and hit the dog. Well, all those things, the stick, the fire, are all the different empires. So Egypt, which is not mentioned in this part of the Bible, but it's part of our history. Egypt, then along comes Babylonia, and along comes Cyrus, and you remember it's on TV sometimes the 300, the battle between Persia and the Greeks. So Cyrus takes over Babylonia, and pretty much it's just he ate the empire. But what Cyrus did that was interesting is he issues an edict saying, you Judeans can go back to your land. And again, I don't want to dwell on the politics of it. It's very possible that Ezra and Nehemiah were not just, good, pious Jews, but politically savvy people that got into the court and got to know this new king. And they convince him maybe that they need an outpost back in Judea. So isn't that nice? So send us back there and we'll be your outpost. So in 538, so this is actually 70 years. Look at that. So Jeremiah may have been right, 70 years of the exile. So 516, they returned and they rebuild the second temple. Oh, there's Debbie. Okay, I'll admit. Okay, so I think I said this last week. Ezra is maybe more of the architect of Judaism, or as we know it, than even Moses. Why? Because in Babylonia, it's very possible, and this is in the movie too. It's possible that he was a scribe. We know that he wrote. And maybe he collected all the stories. I mean, I'm not trying to tell you there's no tooth fairy. We talked about this, but maybe, all those earlier stories of the flood and the patriarchs and the Exodus were all part of our oral tradition, and he made sure they were saved. And so he comes back to Jerusalem, and here at 444, that's about, another 70 years. He stands in the middle of the courtyard or the marketplace and reads the Torah, and he has to interpret it because they don't speak Hebrew. So he translates it freely. And as I told you last week, Ezra is in some ways the first rabbi. By that, I mean, he's the first person who teaches commentary. Well, I'm getting too bogged down here. The biggie coming up is 332. Most historians say 332 these days. I say 333 because it's easy to remember. 586, 333. Alexander conquers Persia again. a bloodless battle, bloodless war. He just takes over. The Persian Empire is falling apart by that point. And the Jews actually welcomed him into Jerusalem. And for a time, as we'll be learning about this in this week and next week, and especially for the preparation for Hanukkah, for a time, Alexander was very, I don't want to say modern, but forward-looking. And he was also very practical. I don't care what religion you practice, just pay your taxes. And he also was very smart. He had all his generals intermarry into the Persian Empire. So, of course, now they're part of the family. So, but then he died in battle. And, but afterwards, as you remember, kingdom was split in half with Syria. The king known as Seleucus took this part. We're doing this in the Hanukkah story too. And Ptolemy took Egypt. So these are descendants. So the descendants of the Seleucus are called Antiochus the fourth. So Antiochus. So Seleucus 1, 2, 3, 4. Antiochus 1, 2, 3, 4. Antiochus the fourth is the bad guy of the Hanukkah story. And what they do is they bring in, it's the first example of what you could call, I just met with Herbert today because he's from El Salvador. You could call it cultural imperialism, right? Or I'll stop to share for a second. I know we're being recorded, so hopefully this is me talking rather than the films. The British came to Hawaii. The Americans came to the rest of the United States, but the British were the first ones in Hawaii. The Portuguese came to Brazil. Oh, look at those colorful natives with their colorful, wonderful customs. But put on a dress, girl. So they were very puritanical, and they brought Christianity. And so that is a good example of cultural imperialism. All right, not necessarily we want your gold, we want your money, we want your corn, we want your tobacco, but we're going to let you live your life more or less. We're not going to kill you all. And later on, of course, things got worse. But that is what happens. That is what America did to South America, US. And so this was new. Before that, you would typically just conquer the place, kick everybody out. But he said, no, you guys can keep doing what you're doing. Alexander did. Seleucus, the people who ruled from Syria, this is the Hanukkah story, came up with a different idea. And this is the classical old school thought. Caius regis, caius religius in Latin. Whatever the king's religion is, that is the religion you must practice. And Ptolemy, the folks in Egypt, were a little bit more laid back. They said, well, we got these Jews. So a lot of Jews have moved to Egypt. That's where the Bible was translated into Greek. Isn't that cool? So Cleopatra was a Ptolemy. And it was, again, something where you would plant yourself on top of the pre-existing structure. So she was not an Egyptian. She was a white girl from Egypt. And the same thing with Antiochus. They were from Macedonia. Okay, well, I'm getting too much into the weeds. There was, as you know, the rebellion, which we're going to get to, of the Maccabeans, or the Hasmoneans, a more correct term, the folks under Judah Maccabee, and they revolted against the Syrians, not Greeks. They're Syrian, Hellenized Syrians. Does the term Hellenism ring a bell? Okay. And Hellenism is also a great word because, again, think about the Americans. Oh, hello, I am Russian. I hear you Americans, you have great rock and roll. Bring me rock and roll. Bring me jeans. So America did not export. I mean, eventually they did. Civil rights, yeah, civil rights is good, but here, buy some of these jeans. And that's what they did with the Greek culture. Hellenism was a watered down version of the Greek culture. And we'll get to that more in the coming weeks. But it transforms over generations, over 3 generations, it transforms Jerusalem, and we get the togas, and we're all speaking Greek. All right. Then we have this interesting 63. So the Hasmonean rulers, the Hasmoneans, they didn't actually win. We'll call it a truce. They made a truce with the Syrians, and the Syrians said, oh, they're a pain in the neck, sort of like Cuba or Panama, or Haiti. Let them do their own thing, but we're going to stay in control. So the Syrians backed off, and for about 102 years, there were actual Jewish kings in Judea, but they were all from the Hasmonean dynasty. Judah, and then his son, and well, Judah didn't die. Judah died, but eventually he died in battle. But so then eventually they're still fighting against Hellenized Jews, assimilated Jews, and Edomites. Those people in Jordan, and they say, well, what are we going to do? We need help. Maybe we should send some ambassadors to Rome. Oh, okay. So they go to Rome and they say, hey, we need some help over here. And the Romans say, with pleasure, we'd be happy to. And they took over. So you go, out of the frying pan into the fire. We will cover more of this in the Hanukkah story. There's another interesting piece of trivia. Does the name Herod ring a bell? Herod's in there's his son Herod. Another Herod is in the Christian story. But when the Hasmoneans were ruling for this short period of time, I hate to say it, they went overboard and they started conquering other places. And they went into Edom, and they said, just like you made us convert, we're going to make you convert. Okay. So one of the families that was, I'm going to say forcibly, but, join up, was the parents or the grandparents of Herod. And so Herod was considered by the Jews to be not really legitimate, but he was Jewish or Judean adjacent. So the Romans come in and they say, oh, hey, we need somebody to govern here. Let's grab this guy. And Herod becomes the king, but he's really a puppet. Again, he's, oh gosh, he's the Pinochet in Chile, right? He's a puppet of the Americans. So so this is the period. Now, what then begins to happen is, and here it is in the previous lesson. I guess I got to go this way. Okay. Timeline, Civ timeline, Jewish law evolution. No, is that the one? No, that's not the one. Hang on. It was the one I did last week. No, I didn't save it from last week. I showed it to you last week, and I want to go look for it right now. Let me see if maybe I can find it. Last week I talked about 3 groups, but they're really 5. What is one group? The Sadducees, or the Saddukim. Sadok, his name was one of the priests. Sadok was a priest in the temple, and the priests were a class unto themselves, and they ran the temple. And let me stop that share and get another one up from last week. So the Tzaddukim, or the Sadducees, are the guys who run the temple, and what they are is, they are priests. Everything we know about what a priest is. They are also, they get their title from hereditary. Grandpa was a priest, dad was a priest. Kohen, remember the Kohanim? Okay, so they run the temple, but in the meantime, a group of people who are called Perushim, or commentators, but also you could call them, let me just get that up here. Hang on. The Perushim in English, we call them Pharisees. Now, Pharisees is a weird word because it's from the writings of Josephus, who was a Jewish slave taken prisoner after the Roman destruction of the temple. And so he wrote a book, a history book, Living in Rome. Let me see if I can find this one. Hellenism.
Josephus.
Yeah, what? I'm getting to
Jo-
your question. Where is it?
I
Go ahead.
was wondering if you're referring to Josephus. Maybe
Yeah.
I.
Josephus came up with names for these different sects of Jews. We're stuck with his names, but they may not be totally accurate. But one group is Sadducees or priests. The second group is Pharisees, or we call them rabbis. And the third group that you may have heard of is the so-called Essenes. I can't find that timeline. Synagogues, Torah, Bibsiv. Let me see if I can get it from last week. Synagogue Hellenism test, Hellenism answers. No. Maybe it is in this week's. Oh, no, I know where it is. Anyway, the third group is the group that was down by the Dead Sea that we call the Essenes. Let me see, is that it? No. They were esoteric. They believed that the end of time was coming. They were apocalyptic. Some of them had got married. Some of them did not. And that group was kind of the ones who founded this little sect, and they had clay pots, and they managed to save the so-called Dead Sea Scrolls, if you've heard of them. I can't seem to find that particular. Oh, I know why, because it's back here. It's in the history. It's in the history section. Jewish civilization timeline expanded. Nope, not there either. Okay, the fourth group that you know about, but you may not realize was a sect, was the so-called Nazarenes. The Nazarenes were a group that decided that Jesus was their Messiah. And they were Jews at the original version, or they were Jews. And so that group, when he was crucified and when the temple was destroyed, they kind of followed him, and they became the roots of the early Christians. And there's still one group that you may not realize, and those were called the Zealots, or their Hebrew name or their nickname in Greek was Sikari. I got to get you guys back. Where are we? Okay. Sikari were so meshuggah that they were almost like, I wanted to say Black Panthers, but worse than Black Panthers. They were like, does anybody remember the Weathermen?
Yes.
Terrorists. They were so convinced that they had to destroy Rome and they had to fight against the Romans that they even would kill collaborators. And so the Zealots are the people who staged the rebellion. I'm not saying they were right or they were wrong, but it is that group that essentially created the rebellion. And so here we go, back to this. So this is quickly the overview. When I got to put this back on the share. When the Jerusalem was being sieged, there was one guy who was inside Jerusalem. I mean, everybody's dying of starvation, and the zealots are fighting against Rome, and it's a lost cause. And Yochanan ben Zakkai takes his students and says, put me in, and they're dying. They're really dying of probably plagues and stuff and starvation. Put me in a coffin, take me out of the city, and beg the Romans to to bury me. And when he gets to the city walls, he presents himself to the conquering general, who happened to be distantly related to him a Roman who had converted to Judaism. And he said, and the guy looks at him and says, you know, like the Jesus story, you were dead, but now you're alive. Okay, that's a miracle. So he says, oh, great, General, I don't ask for anything much. I'm not part of the rebels. Please allow me to go to Yavne. Yavne is a real city. Today it's a kibbutz, an Orthodox kibbutz, and a city. And he creates there the original, call it yeshiva, for lack of a better word. And they study, and that it was thanks to Yochanan ben Zakkai that we survived. Meanwhile, the rebellion continues, and you know about the mountain of Masada. The rebels staged their final martyrdom there at that mountain in the middle of the desert. And so what's left after the temple is destroyed is a few rabbis teaching quietly in the Galilee. He's one of them. Meanwhile, of course, Christianity is also growing or becoming part of this way of life. But there's nobody, Jerusalem is in ruins. Then, horribly, in 135, we're now in CE, whatever that means to you. In 135, a second revolt was staged, this time with the help of 10 rabbis, or many rabbis. Rabbi Akiba says, I think I told you about this last time, Bar Kochba is a man who is a great warrior, and he says, you are the Messiah. You are the appointed one by God to bring about the destruction of Rome. Of course, the rebellion is quashed. All 10 rabbis are killed in very, very horrible ways, tortured to death. And that's the end of it. And after that, the Romans, to punish everybody, say, we're going to look at this one in a minute. We'll come back to that slide because the rabbis surrender and say, all we can do now is teach. And there's a famous, let's stop that share and go to this one. There's a famous story in the Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabbi Yehoshua, I believe it is, sitting on the top of the Mount of Olives, looking down, it's right outside the old city, looking down at Jerusalem and seeing the temple burn. And Yehoshua says, what shall we do now? Right? And, now that because as you understand it, the way to be a religious Hebrew was to sacrifice to God. The temple, even if the rabbis didn't like and this is to help you, Joe, Sadducees favor where did Joe go? Missed him. Sadducees were all about the temple. Pharisees and rabbis, as we know them today, were all about studying and doing mitzvot and commentaries on the Torah. So Yochanan ben Zakkai says, what shall we do? We shall now practice a different form of Judaism. He doesn't say that. He says, we will do mitzvot, we will study, and we will pray. So here, this is the summary of that period. Here we go. Babylonian exile, right? Horrible first trauma, the loss of the Davidic dynasty, Second Temple return. Okay, and here it is. And this is all for your reading. It's enjoyable reading. It's not hard. Pharisees are the people who, as I said, they rejected Hellenism. I would call them the Democrats of that time. By that I don't mean they adapted. They said we got to adapt to the times. Hillel, Shammai, the different rabbis. The Sadducees would be like not Republicans, but more like the strict constructionists. We're doing what God says, right? Well, when the temple, and by the way, they also did assimilate. A lot of them became Hellenizers during the Greek period. And the Essenes he mentions, the early Jewish Christians. Okay, so guess what happens? When the temple is destroyed, this is by the Romans, who's out of work, folks? Who's out of work? Remember the Levites under the tradition was the Levites had to be supported by the people, and the money came in, so back in Moses' time, the Levites did not hold land. They were supported by the people. So, hi, my name is Bob Cohen. I need a job, can you imagine? So they were poor, they were roaming around, and essentially the rabbis became the leaders. Now, this is what I'm trying is rabbis' ability to adapt biblical traditions, including everything we know, dietary laws, observance of the festivals, worship. We now become, as you may have heard this expression, the people of the book, right? We are no longer the people of the land. We are the people of the book. And this is what Judaism became for 2,000 years. Anyway, and you want to understand why I'm a Zionist, why I believe in the resurrection of Israel is because, I don't want to see animal sacrifices. Please don't do that to me, but we were a nation. I got to stress that. We were a nation with our own land, and then we become a religious group in order to survive. Now, get to mission in just a second. Just as a sidebar, the Dalai Lama, right? So the Dalai Lama and his people were in Joe's there. Okay. The Dalai Lama and his people were from India. The Chinese came, the Dalai Lama was from Tibet, which is north of India. And the Chinese conquered Tibet and murdered and killed and kicked them out. Just similar story. Isn't that interesting? So now the Tibetan Buddhist monks live in a northern India area called Dharamsala. So Reb Zalman, I talk about him a lot, my Rebbe, went to Dharamsala. And there was a reason, of course, it's a sidebar, but because a lot of Jews were interested in Buddhism, So he brings all these Jews with him, and they want to meet. So there's a famous meeting between Reb Zalman and the Dalai Lama. Look it up. Dalai Lama's like this, and Zalman's like, and they're looking at each other, and it was a beautiful meeting. But one of the things that came out of that was he asked Zalman, how did you guys survive for 2,000 years without a land? We need your guidance. Isn't that incredible? So I go back to this idea. I cannot stress it enough. Oh, here's the Jewish law evolution. That's also good. Cannot stress this enough. We survived because the rabbis created out of the traditions that they had already developed this idea that what do you do as a Jew? Well, there's no temple, there's no sacrifice, there's no priests, there's certainly no Moses, but we have to keep on with the books and the laws. So, and by the way, I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but I want to emphasize that the temple and the synagogue existed at the same time during this period until the temple was destroyed. So for a long time, this is my joke. I'd say, hey, Moshe, what are you doing for Shabbat? Oh, I'm going to the temple. What do you get to do there? Yeah, I don't know if I would do this so many times. I don't remember if I said it with you. What do you get to do there? Oh, we get to watch from the 34th row, the priests bring in a bull or a sheep or a goat, and the Levites sing, and this group sings Shema Yisrael, and this group sings Baruch Shem Kavod. That's why you do it today. And they sing the chorus, and they have an orchestra. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful performance. Moshe, says his friend Shmuel, what do you get to do? We watch. And so Moshe turns to Shmuel and says, what do you do on Shabbat? Oh, I go to Rabbi Hillel's house, or whatever the name of the rabbi was. I go to so-and-so's house. What do you do there? We study, we debate, we argue, we look at the Torah portion. And then once in a while, comes much later, once in a while, there's a 13-year-old, excuse the expression, boy, kid, who comes with his father. And that's how the bar mitzvah was born. Not till the 13th century did it become very commonplace. But the idea is and girls, by the way, I should say this because I am a feminist. Girls also were part of the tradition of that time. Women, often a rabbi would have a wife at home say, honey, the guys and I were debating what should we do about this kosher law and stuff. And she said, you dummy, got to do it this way. And so he goes back the next day. And maybe he says his one wife told me, maybe he doesn't, maybe he claims credit. So there was a lot of books being written in the 80s and 90s, and even now, about women of that period. This goes for the church, by the way, too. The church had women leaders, but there was such a pushback. Oh, no, women cannot offer sacraments. There were women in the church, early church group. All right, so in any event, what we have is, and we'll get to this one. All right, let's do. All right, we will not be able to cover it all, okay? But we're gonna look at this one. No, that's not the one I wanted. All right. Well, all right, there's that timeline. I did that. Rabbinic Civ timeline. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan, I'm sorry, not Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the rabbinic rebellion, the second rebellion that I mentioned, was, okay, this should do it. Yeah, let's do that one. Okay. Mishnah overview. Here we go. We're going to put it on the chat. Click to open. And that's why you have to read this stuff, guys. But I'm hoping we can cover some of it. Another famous rabbi, hang on, screen share. Another famous rabbi, many years later, is confronted once again with a problem. What is the problem? Okay, I said the temple was destroyed the second time in 70 CE. Remember that date. These are dates you should remember. 586 first temple, 539 Persian conquest, 516 return. Okay, 333 Alexander and the Greeks come in. It's going to be great. We're going to have lots of togas. And oh, by the way, you can eat pork. No, we can't. And so the Jews kind of assimilate. So by the time the Romans are there, the Jews are already speaking Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. Jesus, by the way, did not probably could understand a little Hebrew. I'll come back to that screen share. I mean, I want to just cover this briefly. You may not know what is the difference between, I keep on talking about Hebrew versus Aramaic. Hebrew is more the South, Judea. Aramaic was the language that was spoken in the north because of Syria. And the only difference, its major difference is, you remember the Kaddish? Yit Gadal v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah. That is Aramaic. So Jesus probably did not say shalom. He probably said shlama. Shlama is Aramaic for shalom. The best analogy I can give you is, if you know a little Spanish, you can learn Italian. I did. I went, uno, due, tres, cuatro, cinque, So I learned Spanish, and then I never learned Latin, but you can learn Latin because they're all Latin languages. So Hebrew and Aramaic are like this, very close. So, and this is important because I'm going to talk about how the Mishnah was developed. So, when the temple is destroyed, and then when the whole place is destroyed, the rabbis had what we call, is this up now on screen share? Oh, I got a screen share again. Whoops. Get that out of the way. Screen share. Am I screen sharing? No, because I took it off. Okay, too many things going on. Oh gosh. Where'd you go? Zoom. Okay. So I said there was a tradition of oral law. There is a tradition of the written law, right? The written law says, hey, you may not see the kid in its mother's milk. But the rabbis interpreted that to mean you may not eat milk and meat. There you are, Sam and Emily. You may not eat milk and meat in the same meal. We've been talking about kosher at their house. So it was forbidden to write down the oral traditions because these rabbis were all, from the time of Yochanan ben Zakkai to Hillel and Shammai, and by the way, there were always pairs. There was always one that was more lenient and one that was more strict. Hillel is the more lenient, Shammai is the more strict. So all of this is being talked about, and the person, again, I'd like to give analogies. Did you ever take a college class and there's a lecture and the lecturer stands there, blah, 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 and then there's a TA in front taking notes, and then you have a section meeting with the TA and say, what the hell was he talking about? And the TA deciphers it, and then you argue about it. So the TA was a person, in this case, who memorized, I'm pointing in my head if you can't see me, memorized whole sections of oral law. The 4 questions, folks. Ma nishtana ha'layla hazeh. The 4 questions that we say at the Seder is part of the Mishnah. Okay. So this word Mishnah in Aramaic is Tana. It is the oral law. This is what it says here. Rabbinic commentaries, legal decisions, insights, and interpretations of the Torah by the Tanaim over several centuries, transmitted by word of mouth until the time of Rabbi Judah. I'm going to talk about him. So we had Yochanan ben Zakkai. I don't want to confuse you. Judah, the prince, he was called. The temple was destroyed. But the second rebellion was even worse. All of Israel is wiped out. And everybody's getting on their camels or horses and caravans going back to Babylonia or Egypt, or some stay, they're allowed to stay in the north of Israel. But Judah says, you know what? We have a tradition that says we should not write this down. It's oral law. However, we got to write it down. Otherwise, everybody's going to forget it. It's just like, the American Constitution, I guess, would be a good way of talking about it. This stuff, these ideas were around for several centuries, and then they wrote them down. So this is a huge book or collection of books in 6 orders. You don't need to memorize these. And each one it reads like, and we'll look at it in a second, it reads like an oral tradition that is being written down. I'll see if I can make it a little bit bigger. So the next generation, they're called tractates, or in Hebrew, they're called masechta. So the very first Mishnah a kid learned, kids always learned the ones had to do with property up here, Baba Kama, Baba Metzia. But the first one I studied in rabbinical school is blessings and prayers. And it tells us, how do you do the blessings? And by the way, the Mishnah is very, I don't want to say it's dry, but it's very straightforward. Da, 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 da. So here they are. The first order consisting of 11 books, and all of these have to do with agricultural cycles. There's not a class on Mishnah, but I sent an article on that. All of this second order, has to do with the festivals. Oh, you want to know how to keep Shabbat? Read it in Mishnah on Shabbat. That's where the 39 categories of Shabbat were delineated. So all of this was oral law, and then Judah the prince wrote them down. Passover, you want to know how to do a Seder? That's where it is, at least for that time. Yoma, Day of Atonement, how do you celebrate Yom Kippur? Sukkah, these are all tractates. Okay, so then, let me stop the screen share. I know this is a lot to take in, but what then happens is the next generation, it's a lot of material, I know. The next generation of folks have moved mostly back to Babylonia. By the way, there are let's see if I can do this. Yes, let's do this one. This is from the, oh, okay, this is from, what's his name? The ITJ, the Intro to Judaism. When I say ITJ, that's the group in Denver. And by the way, you could have signed up for that. I think you're getting better from me, but I don't care. If you want to go to them, go to them too. So here's another timeline. There you go. 539, end of the Babylonian exile. This is all in your stuff I send you. 333, Alexander. 140 or so thereabouts, the emergence of the Pharisees. Here's good old Jesus, right? Here's the last rebellion, the big rebellion, and then the bigger one, it's here on the next page. Oh, there, it goes in 2 pages. Okay, Bar Kokhba rebellion. All right, so, and here is, whoops, Judah the Prince. So this is all of this period, it's 2 pages, all of this period from about, I say from 400 to 400, you can say from 500 to 500, is all called the rabbinic period or the Greco-Roman period. But here we go. This is where the rubber hits the road. He says, we have to write this down, and he writes down the Mishnah. Mishnah is universal. Nobody questions that. But there were 2 different groups of people who, one group stayed in Palestine and they continued writing, and they composed something called the Jerusalem Talmud, or the Palestinian Talmud, sometimes they call it. Another group who went back to Babylonia continued and wrote the Babylonian Talmud. And generally speaking, the Babylonian Talmud is considered to be a little bit more coherent. But what is Talmud? Okay, here it is. And then this is for some of you. So we have written Torah. What is written Torah? Sam, what's written Torah?
All of it.
The Torah. The Torah. The law that's written down in the Torah, plus other things, maybe other things in other books, but mostly the 5 books. Oral Torah, I said, was traditions talked about from the rabbis, from word to mouth, with that TA, guy sitting there. And they were, I say TA, they were more like human tape recorders. And they memorized whole sections of Jewish law, right? The 39 categories of that you should not do on Shabbat are blah, 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 blah. And this is how you do a Seder, blah, 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 blah. And they memorized it. Finally, like I said, Judah the Prince says, we got to write it down. And then, this is, they didn't say it here, then there was something called Gemara. Now, remember I said Hebrew is the universal language, but Aramaic becomes the lingua franca. That's another way of saying the spoken language. So the Gemara, and I'll show you a page of it here. This is going to blow your minds. This is what a page of Talmud looks like. Okay, this is from their thing, but I have this, and I studied it at home. I studied it in rabbinical school. This is the first passage or chapter of Brachot, and it begins, here's the Mishnah, Me'ematai korinet shema Baravin. Okay. From when do they read the Shema in the evening service? From the time that the Kohanim enter into their Holy of Holies to eat. And so they said, what time are you supposed to read the Shema? All right. So all this stuff is Mishnah. And it's written with Hebrew letters, and it's no vowels, but you can read it. It is, and it's translated, it's available in English. But then this next generation of Amoraim, the next generation makes their commentaries, and that's here. Well, actually, it starts here, and they comment. Is that too esoteric for you? They explain, what do you mean? What do you mean? What time is the sunset? What time do they read? Well, so they discuss it. So the Mishnah is short and terse and clear, but it's not so clear when you're in Babylonia. So then they continue. This part is harder. I had to study this, and I am not as good with Aramaic as I am with Hebrew. By the way, there is now available English translations of the Talmud too. So Gemara, Mishnah, here's Mishnah, plus Gemara equals Talmud. Is that hard? You got it? Let me go back to the other. Where is it? Okay. Yeah, here it is. This one here. So you do not have to know this to go to the baked in, folks. I just want you to understand. Judaism, as we understand it, is not Bible anymore. It is a Talmudic invention. And in the Talmud, there are different kinds of learning. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is one of my favorite subjects is Midrash. Midrash, let's see if I have it. No, they don't cover it here. Midrash is commentaries on the Torah portion, or sometimes the book of Esther, the book of Song of Songs. They're kind of like really fun, interesting commentaries. And it's, for example, here's a great example. You all have heard it. Abraham broke his father's idols, and his father came back from his business trip and said, "What the hell happened here? Oh, they're having an argument." That's not in the Torah. That's a midrash. It's a comment. It's a story. Or the other great story that you may remember is Abraham himself. Later on, God says, "Take your son, your only son, the one you love, Isaac." And the midrash comes along, and then later on, Rashi, commentator in the Middle Ages, says, it's almost 8 o'clock, says, aha, this is Abraham's arguing with God. Take your son. I have two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. The one you love. I love them both. You know, like anything but. The one you love. I love them both. Isaac. Aha. So what they do, what Midrash does, is it fills in the blanks. Here's another great one. Remember, we talked about this. Who is God talking to in the beginning of creation? Let us make man in our image. So the Midrash had to rescue, all these, Hellenized Jews and all these Greeks are coming along. See, that proves that there's many gods. God's talking to the other gods. No, God's talking to the angels. God's talking to himself. So all of that is in a commentary called Bereshit Rabbah, Genesis Rabbah. Rabbah is, by the way, I'm called Rabbi. You know what Rabbi means? Great one. Rabbah. The greater, you mean like you read the annotated Hobbit or the annotated Alice in Wonderland, right? And then when you read that, you say, oh, this is what Lewis Carroll had in mind, or this is what Tolkien, Tolkien was writing the Hobbit and the Tolkien trilogy during World War I and then later World War II. I mean, he wrote it for his children, and everything about it, the orcs were like the Nazis. Anyway, the point is that the Midrash fills in blanks. Now, before I go further, there are two kinds of Midrash and two kinds of Talmud, too. You can have Talmud and Midrash both. And they are, let's see, okay, here it is. I know this is a lot to cover. Don't worry, it's being recorded, and you will see it anyway. Okay, here it is. So I've explained that Midrash means commentary. There are Midrashim. There are books called Midrash. Is that clear? Midrash on Genesis, Midrash on Exodus, Midrash on Leviticus, Midrash on Esther, Midrash on Song of Songs. Are beautiful books. But there's also, I remember I said Torah can mean many things. Midrash can just mean commentary. Like Emily, give me a Midrash on your life in college. What was going on in your life? It's not just what classes you took. You're talking about my spiritual development, or anybody can. So Midrash means an elevated way of interpreting life. However, there are two kinds of Midrash found in the books of the Torah, of the Midrashim, and also in the Talmud. The easier one is the one that I already mentioned, and it is a word that sounds like the book we use for the Seder, Haggadah, the telling. Agadah. Agadah is in Aramaic, same thing. Midrash Agadah, I know I'm doing a lot here, especially for some of you new folks. Agadah is stories, philosophy, commentaries, arguments, mythology. You know, Moses is a great one. Moses goes up to the mountain and the angels argue with him and he has to wrestle with the angels. I mean, you know, it's like Hercules. So they made up stories that were really cool, they're really colorful. But there's another kind of midrash, and that's what this is going to talk about. Halakha, by now you know the word halakha means law, right? Okay, so here's the classic ones that they give in this study. In every generation, this is great, a religious civilization must either evolve or face the risk of becoming, in Heschel's words, this is Rabbi Heschel from the 1960s, irrelevant, dull, oppressive, insipid. For those of you who grew up Catholic, my sympathies, I'm sorry. or, you know, so the rabbinic revolution was a period of intense religious creativity and reinvention as a new class of leaders took biblical religion and radically transformed it into the Judaism. This is a great line. Okay. So here's the classic, one of the classic examples. And this is how Mishnah works. Deuteronomy says, a man has a stubborn and rebellious son. I think we may have talked, I get mixed up which class I've talked to, you know, stone the kid. All right. And they bring it to the town square and it says he's a glutton and a drunkard. Oh my God, we don't do that. So what did the rabbis have to do? They, instead of saying we don't follow that, well, there's some things they don't follow, but what they would say is, oh, we're going to debate when does the rebellious son become religious? If he has hairs in his beard, doesn't mean that he has hairs in his beard. It means like he shows off, I'm a man, I know what I'm supposed to do, you know. And he says, could be a son or a daughter, right? But at what time is he liable? Well, if he starts drinking, he must be. So what they basically said is this has to be so much that he said a glutton and a drunkard, right? He has to be so horrible that he would generally get thrown to prison anyway. You get what I'm saying? So what they did was they legislated it out of existence. And here's where it gets to. There never was and never will be a true ben sorer umoreh, meaning, why is it written? Oh, so you should study it. So what they did was they said, you know, tell your children, if you're not a good kid, I'm going to have take you out in the square and the rabbis will stone you. But no, it doesn't happen. Even if his father denounces him. So all of this is what they did. So that's an example of how I don't want to say they made it impossible, but they legislated it out of existence. Here's the other example. Somebody else want to read instead of me? This is a great story. You've heard this before, I think. Oops. So there's two rabbis arguing about a stone or clay oven. Go ahead.
Me, Rabbi?
Yeah, go ahead. Go for it.
An oven was constructed out of layers of clay with sand in between the layers. Rabbi Halter says this oven is pure. The sages say it is impure.
So, I mean, impure mean it cannot be kosher. Sam and Emily, we're talking about what you can kosher. So it's clay with sand. Okay, Eliezer says, no, I this is what I believe. And then go ahead. Then Eliezer said,
the law goes according to me, and the carob tree will prove it. And the carob tree uprooted and moved 100 yards.
are you getting the humor with this? You know, they look, hey, wait a minute, the carob tree just moved, you know. It's like, you know, some kind of sci-fi movie or something. The sages respond. Go ahead.
We don't accept proof from trees.
Right. What's the tree got to do with it? Don't give me this crap. And he says, okay, if the law is according to me, let the river flow backwards. I'm sorry. I took your line away.
Oh, you're fine.
Yeah. And
The river will prove it, and the river turned around and flowed backwards.
Are you just picturing how they're it's like you read this and you're cracking up. I remember in rabbinical school. Okay, so there's two guys arguing, and one he says, "If the law is according to me, let the river prove it." Oh, the water has nothing to do with it. Finally, or not finally, there's one more. Go ahead, third time.
The law goes according to me, and the house of study will prove it. And the walls of the house of study began to collapse in on themselves.
Now, this is really slightly abridged. According to the way I read it, the walls of the house of study are in deference to Eliezer, they start to collapse, but in deference to Joshua, they don't collapse totally. They just go, like that. And oh, what are we supposed to do? They're both good rabbis. And Joshua says, what? Don't give me this crap. The law, the walls start collapsing. It says they start collapsing out of respect for Joshua. Then finally, the big kahuna. Go ahead.
The law goes according to me, and heaven will prove it. And
okay, go ahead. You're doing great, Devin.
A divine voice came out of heaven and announced, what are you arguing about? The law goes according to Rabbi Eliezer? On all matters.
So again, are you picturing this? The Lord said, "No, Eliezer is right." And Joshua gets to his feet and said, "This is a quote from Deuteronomy, where this is a context is important when they're discussing, they're talking to Moses is saying, the law is not in heaven that you should go, that somebody can bring it to you. It's not in the across this somewhere beyond the sea. Remember that's where that comes from. It's not beyond the sea. It's not in heaven. It is right here in your hearts." So they quote that line. I say, "What do you mean, God? Get your face out of here. It's not up to you anymore." So God, it is not in heaven. He quotes the text because he has to make it legit. So go ahead. Rabbi Yirmiyah explains.
Torah was already given at Mount Sinai. From that point on, we don't rule according to divine voices. As it says, after the majority, you should incline. Exodus 23:2.
Okay, so what we have is, and this is a great kind of bit meta level, though, beyond the story, is it's also showing how the rabbis took upon themselves to say, we're in charge now. No more Moses, no more prophets. Even God is there, but we are the ones who inherited this. Sometime later,
Rabbi Nathan met Elijah at the prophet and asked, what was God doing at the time? Elijah replied, the Holy One was laughing and saying, my children have defeated me. My children have defeated me.
In other words, God sort of says, hey, they're right. And I can't say anything anymore. But this story illustrates, and you can read this on your own too. This story illustrates the idea that they took upon themselves. I did not read this, but here's another section. Pirkei Avot is what it's called. It's called, and I got a funny story for this one too. It's called the Ethics of the Fathers, or the Sayings of the Rabbis. And it was a collection in the Mishnah. There's no debates. There's no arguments. It's just a collection of their favorite sayings. Okay? Like Rabbi Hillel used to say, Rabbi Shammai used to say, and they're really great sayings. So the very first section of Pirkei Avot, though, which is not covered here, says, Moses gave the Torah to Joshua. Joshua gave it to the elders to the men of the same Sanhedrin, the men of the same Sanhedrin to the scribes, Ezra, and the scribes gave it to us to explain it. In other words, we're the bosses now. Not bosses, we're the legislators. Again, a best example I could give you is stop share. But no, I'm not going to stop the share. But you're driving down the highway. Well, is the share still on? Okay, you're driving down the highway in the middle of New Mexico. Or in Wyoming, it's even better because I've done that. And the sign says 85 miles an hour, right? And you hit 85 miles an hour. Maybe you hit 90 because it's empty desert. And then you go, you hit I don't know, Casper, and the sign suddenly says, woo, 45 miles an hour. And then the cop stops you, pulls you over. Did you see the sign? All right. Well, so but the actual, according to the written Torah, do you know what the speed limit is in America? You may travel no faster than is safe in that area. So it's 25 in a school, 15 in a school zone, I think, 25 in a church or institutional zone, 25 in the middle of the city, 45 here, 50. So they could still ticket you. But technically, the written Torah says no. It's not a great example, but it's an example of how things got interpreted over time. Back to the screen. So let's look at Pirkei Avot and let's look at some other examples. Okay, everybody gets to read one. Simon the Righteous. This is, one of the great rabbis, Shimon HaTzadik. How about Stephanie? Are you on there? Can you see this? These are great quotes, and I'm sorry they're all men, but that's the way it was back then.
Which one?
Okay.
Shimon the Righteous in
The
green.
world rests on three pillars: on Torah, on service, and on the deeds of loving kindness.
And we sing that in synagogue sometimes when we take the Torah out on the way back. Al shlosha divarim, on three things the Torah, al ha-Torah, on the Torah, on law, on service, the al ha-avodah, meaning on prayer, and the al gemilut chasadim. Okay, great. So these are great little pithy. Pithy is a great word to know, by the way. Not pith. I'm not pithed off. I'm being pithy. They're saying something quick. This is great if you ever are a college professor or a teacher in a religious school. Hillel taught. Somebody want to do blue?
I'll do it.
Okay.
A shy person cannot learn. A strict person cannot teach.
Let's
And
stop there. Let's stop there before that one, because the next one is also very important. Meaning, if you're a teacher and you are not just shy, but you hold off. You got to be demonstrative. And I'm sorry, the shy person doesn't is the student is afraid to raise their hand. That's right, cannot learn. A strict person who's no, do what I told you to do. I'm not going to answer that question. So then this next one is even more powerful. And in a place.
Oh, and in a place where there is no humanity, strive to be a true human being.
Isn't that incredible? And another way of putting it in Yiddish is, when there's no mensch, you be a mensch. They say in Yiddish. And my friends, when I was in the prison, I could say that at services, compared to the world out there, it's like a not a funny house with mirrors, but just stealing kosher food or taking somebody's cookie without asking it is a crime, but so people did things that were not nice to each other. So just being a human being, or in the concentration camp, but you could put it any way you want. You could say, if there's nobody around who practices ethical behaviors, you got to be that person. You got to be a true human being. All right, so there's a lot of these, but before we run out of time, 8:15. Does anybody, I'm really going to age myself now. Anybody remember, Debbie, you're still there? Okay. Does anybody remember the show Kung Fu with David? It's on repeats on MeTV. David Carradine, who's not Asian, is playing and it's in Western times and back in the frontier days. Whatever, the premise of the show is kind of strange, but it's really cool. So he is playing an American boy raised in China by monks. I'm sorry, Sam, he looked a little bit like you, but his head was shaven. I mean, I'm comments about it. But in the movie, in the series, David Carradine is this guy, And so he was a pacifist, and he's always being confronted by gangsters and cowboys and people trying to create all kinds of things. And he always, you know, whatever he does that's kung fu-ish, he always does it only when there's no other option to defend the good guys. But he's always got these dilemmas in his mind. He says, "Oh, what should I do?" And flashback is a flashback in the screen. There's a point of my telling you this. There's a flashback to when he was a little boy, also with the shaved head because he's a monk. He's a little boy in China, and the monk is talking to him, and the monk was played by a real Chinese man. I don't know if he was blind, but he's supposed to be blind in the series. And he would say, "Oh, great grasshopper, that which is evil to you, do not do to your fellow human being." And what the thing is, the guys who were writing the scripts were Jewish guys. And they said, "What are we going to have the Chinese sage say to little, I forgot his name. Anyway, the little character, what are we going to have him say? Well, take a line out of the Ethics of the Fathers." So these lines become things that we all say. The classic one you've heard, I just said it a minute ago. Hillel and Shammai are two of the sages of the time. Shammai, as I pointed out, was kind of the strict constructionist, and he gets a bad rap. I mean, the poor guy was a carpenter. He had to work for a living. I never liked him, but then I read up on him more. He was working, you know, and he had and you weren't rabbi just for the hell of it. You were, so he's a carpenter and a pagan or a Greek or a Roman who's curious about Judaism, legitimately curious about Judaism, says, "I will convert to your faith if you can tell me all of the Jewish religion while I stand on one foot." What do you do? Shammai says, "You imbecile," or you rude person. He hits him with he's got a measuring stick. He hits him with the stick and says, "Get out of my shop." It's the same guy then goes to Rabbi Hillel, who is painted as a righteous, I mean, a very nice, lenient guy. And it's true. But this is the backstory. Hillel's family came from Babylonia with money, and he lived in Jerusalem, and he was supported. So naturally, I mean, it's the classic story, folks, like Americans' elections. The working class becomes conservative and votes against themselves. But not, let me get started on that. Somebody will get mad. But, you know, the rich guys or the not well-off people are intellectual. So anyway, Hillel, in his wisdom, and he was always doing this, he was always saying the lenient view or the tolerant view or the humanistic view, whereas Shammai and his students, would take a more strict position. For example, other things I mentioned, the kinds of the laws. So Hillel says the classic line you remember, that which you want to know it while they're standing on one foot, go stand on one foot. That which you would not want somebody to do to you, do not do to them. But everybody forgets the second line. The rest is commentary. Now go and study. So according to tradition, the man did convert to Judaism. I don't think it's relevant, but it's interesting. So notice how this story becomes part of the Pirkei Avot. All right, questions on that? So you can buy a copy of the Ethics of the Fathers by itself. You can buy a copy of the Mishnah by itself. And when I was first getting into Judaism when I was in college, the version I had of the Mishnah, oh, here it is. This is another Hillel. The version I had of the Pirkei Avot was translated by a Christian professor. This is another classic. Remember this one? Okay. Debbie, what you want to? Are you there? You want to say, "If I'm not for myself"? You've heard this 100 times. No. Who wants to read? Okay, Emily. If I am not for myself.
If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? If not now, when?
Isn't that incredible? I mean, 3 lines, 3 sentences, and it encapsulates all of, existential needs in your life. If I don't take care of me, who else is going to take care of me? But if I'm only for myself, I'm a, selfish person, or selfish. I was going to use a different word, curse word or something. I'm an egotist. But if not now, when is probably the heaviest thing, because actually I think they were using that in the campaign this season. If not now, when? If we don't fight now, when are we going to do it? Or like you have to do it. Now the next one is also quite interesting. Rabbi Tarfon, not Rabbi Halfon. Tarfon, another rabbi of that time, wrote, I'll say this: the day is short and the work is long. Actually, it's quite a little longer than that. It says, the day is short and the work is long. The master is waiting. God is waiting. You have to do this, but you are not obligated to complete the work. Neither are you free to desist from it. So isn't that beautiful? You get this idea that these are the sayings of the rabbi. So even though, we have law and we have commentaries, another great one. Oops. Do not withdraw. Hillel also said this, do not withdraw from the community just by itself. Somebody, joins our synagogue and then stops coming to synod services. I'm not going to say, it's not anybody in particular, but somebody, I might say to them, or somebody's depressed. God forbid, somebody just lost their spouse. This is good for you, Emily, for your therapy. Do not withdraw from the community, meaning you need your friends. You need people around you. It's a classic story in the Hasidic tradition of a rabbi who goes to visit a man on the outskirts of town, and hasn't shown up to synagogue in weeks. And the man is sitting in his house because everything's gone wrong. Maybe his wife died or things, and he's sitting there depressed in a cold cabin. And the rabbi says, can I come in? And he doesn't even do anything. He just sits down in front of the man in front of the fireplace and starts moving the embers around, puts a log on the fire, and suddenly there's a, full on flame, and they sit by the fire and they warm themselves. And the rabbi hasn't said a word yet. And he says, do you see what I mean? Moishi or Shlomo, what do you mean, Rabbi? Do not separate yourself from the community. You are the spark. I brought in the spark. So it's great. And then goes on, do not be sure of yourself until the day of your death. So these are all great lines. When I have leisure, I will study. Perhaps I'll never have leisure. My mantra. This is also very good. Make for yourself a teacher, acquire for yourself a friend. Meaning, you have to have not just a teacher, but a colleague. All right, so to sum this up, this is by this, I don't know who wrote this, Janet Davis. Oh, okay, so she's a lecturer, and maybe she was, now I don't know where she is now. But you can study Talmud. You just have to do it in small bites. It is interesting, and it will give you a different sense of what Judaism is. Also, chat. No, I missed something in the chat. Somebody had to leave. Okay, chat. Wait a minute, that was Christina. New message. Oh, Christina, better to be impressed in good company. Christina, you got to speak up once in a while. I think that's great. That's better to be impressed in good company. Hold my hand, hug me, light the fire, give me some tea. Don't drink, but give me some tea. Don't drink alcohol. And that's nice. Better to be impressed in good company. I like that. All right, summing this up, 8:22, we have time, and I'll open for questions because we haven't really covered this middle period of the Maccabees and the Hellenist thing. All I would say in passing is Hellenism and the Greek influence paves the way for cross-fertilization. What do I mean by that? As I said before, the the Bible was translated into, some of the Bible was translated into Greek in Alexandria. Once it's translated into Greek, who can read it? The pagans, the Greeks, the Romans. And so it becomes part of the, the medieval world, Middle Eastern world. That's number one. Number two, even though we are taught that, we must not assimilate, there's a number of things that we got from the Greeks and later from the Romans, although we hated their guts, because it was a way of surviving. I remember I've been saying all along, folks, Jews live in two civilizations all the time. We live in two civilizations. I got more here, but I don't want to do these. Okay. This is from Mishnah Sanhedrin. This is read Rabbinic Lit 1, 2, and 3 on your own. And we'll continue next week too. Why was one human being created at the beginning of creation? And the rabbis discussed that. Why is the Sabbath? This is all from Midrash. Okay. So this is an earlier version of what I used to teach. It's material that I think is very valuable. But they didn't include it in their stuff. So that's Rabbinic Lit 1, 2, and 3. Number 2. Oh, this is a great one. Let me do one more. Stop share. Is it showing as share? This is just awesome. Where is it? Rabbinic Lit 2. I think this has Emily again on it. For 2 years, to be or not to be. Can you read it? Go for it. Can you see it?
Oh, yes, sorry. Our rabbis taught for 2.5 years were Beth Shammai and Beth Hillel in dispute, the former asserting that it were better for man not to have created than to have been created, and the latter maintaining that it is better for man to have been created than not to have been created. They finally took a vote and decided that it were better for man not to have been created than to have been created. But now that he has been created, let him investigate his past deeds, or, as others say, let him examine his future actions.
Isn't that weird? I mean, why are they arguing about something? Well, because the Romans were running around oppressing everybody. They had nothing better to do than talk about philosophy. So they argue with this about, and notice that I said before, Shammai's group, or the pessimist, or the cynics, if you want to call them that, and Hillel's were the optimists, but they both agreed, maybe it would be better. It's a damn shame, but now that we're here, we better make the best of it. And again, also there's a whole thing on how often is a man obligated to pleasure his wife, which I will not get into right now, but it's all kinds of stuff. I'm not an expert on this stuff because it's so vast. The Torah is 5 books. The entire Bible is, 34, including the Torah. The Mishnah is 6 orders, or Masechtot, and then the Talmud is vast. So that's why, if you want to understand, Orthodox Judaism or yeshiva scene, the yeshiva world, that's how kids were taught to spend their time, was doing that. So for next week, I want to cover the, even though it's early, I need to cover the Hanukkah story. And this one here, this is another slide that tells us, again, you're saying, oh my God, Rabbi, it's so vast. This is how Jewish law evolves, right? We have the written law, the Torah, there's the Torah, right? This is a little dark. The Mishnah, codification of the oral law compiled by Judah and his court around 200 CE. Then we have over here the Jerusalem Gemara and the Babylonian Gemara. The two of them together make up the Talmud. Then we have all these other folks, and we get to the Middle Ages, Rashi, famous Rabbi Shimon Yitzhaki of France, of Mayence, and you've heard of Maimonides. So then later on, the Code of Jewish Law and responsa literature. Well, where do we go from there? Aha! Well, you know that there are reform responsa and conservative responsa. I talked about this. We'll be talking about it when we get into the modern period. The reform movement, I'm not going to get into movements tonight, but the reform movement said women are equals, women must be allowed to have bat mitzvahs and must be allowed to become rabbis, and then went on to lesbians, gays, trans. The conservative movement had to do it smaller steps. He said, let's see if we can find a passage in the Talmud that says where we can make a minority opinion into a majority opinion. Well, it says in the Talmud, a woman should not read from the Torah because it would show that there's no intelligent man there. Well, what if the guys all vote and said the women can read? So they did. So conservative synagogues across the country now have women rabbis and women who read Torah. But there are a handful of smaller conservative shuls that still don't allow it because it's up to the community to decide. Anyway, that's a good example. I told you guys about, did I tell you or somebody else? Oh, it was you and Emily. I was talking about, I read that swordfish was considered kosher by a minority opinion. So my girlfriend and then my wife served a swordfish to my friend Moshe, he's another Moshe. And he said, I can't eat this. I'm leaving your house. It was Shabbat dinner. So we went and made him tuna fish. I don't eat swordfish anymore. I don't eat catfish because it's not kosher. But there was a time when certain kinds of animals, there was a time when they debated in the Talmud about chicken or poultry in general and fish. Does fish bleed? Well, okay. All right. I'm sorry. Open for questions. Oh, it's now 8:30 already. Who's got a question?
I've got one.
Go ahead.
So you were talking about
Taylor, were you signaling too or just yawning? Okay, go ahead.
So
Sorry, I was just coughing.
So the Mishnah, it adds to the story, the first 5 books.
Uh-huh.
So does that explain why sometimes when you're reading about a story, there's like details that you don't actually read in the story?
That's midrash.
Yeah.
You're confusing the two M words. Mishnah is straightforward law.
Okay.
Law about the holidays, law about kashrut, law about Shabbat, law about even stuff that we don't do anymore. The sacrifices, there's a whole section on sacrifices, which they kept. They weren't going to throw it out. But midrash is filling in the blanks. Yes.
Okay.
And there's midrash that's in books of midrash, and there's midrash that's also in the Talmud, in the later stuff, like the story of Hillel and Shammai and the pagan who comes to see them. So yeah, but I was asked to teach a class on midrash. I still have it. I can send it to you guys. But today you'd find this interesting. Today there's a new tradition of, can you do midrash from a new perspective? Can you do feminist midrash or queer midrash? Isn't that cool? Queer midrash, yeah. For example, the first human being was created androgynous. What does that teach us? Okay, so anyway, there's a lot of material out there nowadays. Don't tell the Hasidim that. Okay, who's got another? Debbie, you're always good for a good one. Steph? No?
I got
Okay.
nothing.
Oh,
I have
okay.
nothing either.
All right. I hope I haven't overwhelmed you guys, but what you'll do for next week is, I believe, we'll continue with this, and I just don't know. It's hard to cover this entire period without also covering, let's see, what did I say? 12:3, yes. 12:3 is next week. So we're just touching on these. Mishnah, Gemara, the Talmud, Halakha, okay, Roman oppression. Next week we'll do early, because Hanukkah is so late this year, we're going to cover the Hellenistic and Hasmonean period. So some of the material I sent to you is for that. And you just read, as I'm looking at my email from AOL, Hanukkah for adults. I love it. I wrote it. It's very easy to follow. And the other one is Hanukkah and Hellenism. And I'll send you some more stuff. And I forgot the most important thing. We get to see a movie next week together. It's a movie, it's a cartoon called Lights. If you want to look for it ahead of time, it's cute. It's kiddie, but it's adult. In the movie, it's a cartoon story of Hanukkah for children, but because the story you can read it, you can watch it like a kid, or you can watch it like an adult. I'll just put it that way. All right, it's only 25 minutes long. Because it's a cartoon, and you can watch it with the kids, Taylor. And we'll show it probably at the synagogue in the background. So in the movie, I like this because I love narration. It's they're narrated by Leonard Nimoy and Paul Michael Glaser, who was the original Starsky from Starsky and Hutch, plays a character. And the other thing that's cute about it is that the cartoon characters that are shown in the Greek period also are brought forward as new cartoon characters in the current time. I'm giving it away. Watch the movie. If you don't, we'll watch it together. And it's great for discussion about Hanukkah. And the question on the table is, in what way are American Jews like the Hellenistic Jews? Have we assimilated? Have we isolated? Or have we integrated? There's the three words for next week. Assimilation, isolation, the two extremes, or integration. Naturally, you know what I think the answer is, but it's going to be interesting. Oh, yeah. Oh, Christina, you have a son too? That's cool. All right, so I'll see everybody next week, and watch as many of the movies as you can from wherever you get them. Okay.
Hey,
And
Rabbi.
Yes, ma'am. Who dat?
Sorry, it's Emily.
Oh.
One more thing. Sam and I missed the class about God, and I didn't see the recording.
Okay. I think it was sent. I'll send it again.
Okay, I may
have
have missed it.
Yeah. Well, this one, yes, well, because it says it was sent by Jason to the cloud, and then it goes, Stephanie, do you have it? I'll make sure you get it. Okay.
Okay.
I'll
Yeah,
see if I can
we can
compile
make-
it home. What?
We'll get it for you. Jason
cool.
usually moves it around, so.
I recorded it, but Jason recorded it too, and it's on the synagogue's YouTube channel too, I think.
Oh, I can just look it up then.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Have a blessed Thanksgiving. Of course, I didn't do a spiel about that. Thanksgiving is a kind of a really nice civil American civil religion thing. And if you don't celebrate it, just read Psalms. All right. I'll see everybody next week, and I'll see some of you sooner. All right. Shalom.
Bye.
Laila tov.
Hey, everybody.
Bye.
Good night, Rabbi.
Bye-bye. Oh, bye.
Bye.
Bye. Oh.